May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, Lord Christ, my rock and my redeemer.
Amen.
Please be seated. Thank you. I'm truly grateful to get to share in the Word today. And thank you to Father Alex and Father Earl, Deacon Chester, for sharing the pulpit with me today. I have great passion for the Word and have always enjoyed studying it. Especially the Old Testament. I have even so much as vowed to try to bring the teaching of the Old Testament back to the pulpit and try to share it in light of the gospel of Jesus. But as it stands today, the New Testament reading is a little bit more Old Testament than the Old Testament reading. Indeed, it's hard to contend with. But what I feel God has pressed on me to try to push out here today is this. There is a great hope that is found in the authority of Jesus. And Jesus is desperate for us to know of that hope. There's great hope found in the authority of Jesus, and he's desperate for us to know that hope. So what is hope? Hope is optimism. Maybe we could call it a blessed optimism. Perhaps in its most attractive form, hope is a person who is trusting that things will work in spite of grave and dire uncertainty. We love to see that when someone can really truly believe for the best even while in a bad situation. And so hope is this blessed optimism. And there is great hope in the authority of Jesus. What is authority? I think of authority, I think, don't tell me what to do. It's really the simplest way to think of it. And I like that simple definition sort of reflects back to God. What is it, we can just ask, what is it that God is telling us to do? And then also I think when I think about God telling, it always drives me back to the first passage in the Bible where God calls humanity and life into being. And he sees it as good. He even crowns that sequence as very good. The writer of Romans says God calls things that are not as though they ought to be. So God, in his authority, is perfect and good. He brings justice, mercy, kindness, flourishing. God's authority is ultimate perfection. In God's authority, there is forgiveness of sins. In God's authority, it is right to do good to others who might not seem to deserve it. Mutual decency, respect, consideration, and care for persons. This is what God calls in his authority, and it is good. And there is great hope that is found in that authority. And then we have to say, well, what gets in the way of hope then? If it's so good and it's right to hope, what gets in the way? For me, it's fear. I think we can all agree that fear gets in the way of hope. What if it doesn't work out? What if they don't like me? What if I fail? What if I don't like it when I did it? What if? Indeed, this passage, I think, has been used for the purpose of fear. If you don't believe right, if you are not aware of the signs, if you're not willing to forgo relationships with your brother and mother and sister, you might get left behind. I often think of a joke that I heard. We used to joke about how some people who preach this end times rhetoric would say to others, you better get right or you're going to get left. And I think today I just want to at least set the record straight. This passage is not an end times prescription for you to know how to manage yourself during the end of the world. Indeed, the best way to understand what this passage is telling us is to look at where it sits in the other passages. The passage starts back in chapter 20, verse 1, where it says, one day Jesus went and started teaching in the temple, right? Pretty simple. It starts there, and a series of things have happened, which we've learned about over the last few weeks. Father Earl pointed out last week that it was around Tuesday, during Holy Week, that he's out there teaching in the temple. And he sort of comes in, he's probably greeting people, if you can picture, and they start to try to catch him in some, like, what would be process crimes, right? If he says the wrong thing about the religious leaders, we can arrest him. If he says the wrong thing about the political laws, we can arrest him. And Jesus, he contends and explores and contrasts their ideas for them ultimately to leave them discredited. So then they begin to sort of poke at his ideas, trying to make them sound fantastical or even childish with his nonsense about the resurrection. And Jesus still contends with them. Finally, it seems as though he had enough. And right before our passage, Jesus says, watch out for these people. They are snakes. Their privilege comes from the devouring of widows. It comes from exploiting the poor, is essentially what he's saying. And even right before our passage, there's this scene that's explained where a widow comes in and she gives everything she has. And the rich guys come and they sort of give a little bit of what they have. And even that passage, we've been taught maybe to think that she's all in, and despite her little bit, she was the better believer. But I really think that what we see there is that it just proves Jesus' point. Because we get to our passage, and in our passage, after Jesus is noticed, after he's called out that the religious elites exploit the poor, including widows, we see a widow exploited. She gives everything she has, and it angers Jesus, I believe, not so much that she gave more and the others gave less who could afford it more, but more that these people allowed her to give everything she had when she was the one that was in need. And that's where we find ourselves. And it's almost as if the passage in verse 5 where we pick up starts to say, somebody's got to pay for this beautiful building, right? How it was adorned with beautiful stones and gift dedicated to God. And Jesus, when he hears this, he says, this will be rubble. That's not what it's good for. And when he says this, they're so concerned. What's the sign? How will we know? Right? And perhaps they want to know this because they want to know how they can maybe prevent it from happening. What can we do? How can we know? And Jesus goes on to say, beware that you're not led astray. Many will come in my name. And they'll say, I'm he. I know the way to God. I have the right passage. Jesus essentially is telling them, do not be fooled by them. He says, frankly, don't go after them. I think he's talking about these religious elites that are standing right there. He's talking about them, and he's saying, these people will come and they will not offer hope. They will not offer forgiveness of sins. They will not offer redemption. They will not offer satisfaction to the poor, healing to the sick. They'll come to continue to exploit in my name. Jesus goes on to say, when you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified. They have to take place first. Kingdom against kingdom. Earthquakes. What Jesus is essentially saying is that a faith, a culture that's built on exploitation, kingdom against kingdom. You have the Judaic government that's a religious organization. You have the Roman enterprise, which is there to conquer and build empire. They'll eventually, they're both in a relationship of exploitation. One benefits from the other. It truly is a quid pro quo between the two of them. And that will not last, he's saying. And so you don't need to involve yourself. You don't need to allow these things to stand out or squash your hope. He even goes on to be a little more forthright. Before this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They'll hand you over in synagogues and prisons, and you'll be brought before kings and governors because of my name. The very passages after this sequence of passages goes into the Passion story, and Jesus is handed over to King Herod, and he's handed over to Governor Pontius Pilate. We know where that goes. But he says this will give you an opportunity to testify about the hope that is found in my way, in my authority. You don't need to prepare an argument, because I will give you wisdom. The God of creation, the God incarnate, God-man, is telling people the same thing that has been written and sown throughout the message of Scripture, and that is, I am your God, and you will be my people, and I will be with you. Like I always am, like I always wanted to be. It goes on to say that your brothers and mothers and sisters, friends, relatives, they'll contradict you, they'll be against you. Now, this is not for us to stand against our brothers or neighbors, because remember, we think of God's authority. God's authority says to be kind to those who are not like us, who are other than us. People who are different than we are. So God is not then turning the tables and saying, turning it around and saying, well, you might have to have conflicts with your family and neighbors if you disagree with them. Because that's what's going to happen in the end. It's not the message here. The message is that he's really actually not telling us anything different. I mean, moms and dads disagree over their daughter's boyfriend sometimes. There's all sorts of disagreements. And this will be nothing new. You will have a new way to live. You will be living in a different kind of way. And your mothers and brothers and neighbors might not understand. You might not agree. They might not even like you for it. Some people are pessimistic towards hopeful optimism. My wife and I do foster care. We've shared in child welfare for a while. We brought kids home to our houses, and we've been scoffed at for it. What are you thinking? You already have 7 children. Are you crazy? And it's kind of funny, but they mean it. They mean it. You must be crazy. Or better, we'll be told, you're just trying to do too much. You don't know when to quit. And so I say all that to say, knowing that this is the right thing to do, we've had to trust in doing the right thing, despite how it might make others feel around us. Jesus leaves us with this promise. You will be hated because of my name, but not a hair on your head will perish, and your endurance will gain your souls. There's great hope found in his authority. He's desperate for us to know it. In the lectionary, we'll skip ahead and start in chapter 23, but chapter 21 ends with Jesus going up to the mountain. And it says, every day he was teaching in the temple, and at night he would go out and spend the night at the Mount of Olives, the Mount of Olives. And in the Passion, you know what he was doing up there, right? He's praying in a way where he's sweating drops of blood. And I just believe that if we can picture Jesus Christ after teaching, after contending with the religious elites, and healing the sick, and trying to drive hope into people who were completely baffled by hope, that were taken from the privilege of having hope in God because of whatever sins or status in life they had. Jesus would go up there and pray, God, I hope they've heard me. God, I hope that they know you. I find great comfort in that. I find great comfort that Jesus was willing to pray over people. And so, what I want to leave with today is the same thing that I started with. There is great hope that is found in the authority of Jesus. That authority that tells us to love others recklessly, generously, in ways that are beyond what this world is willing to understand. Despite how much it costs, despite the emotional pain that you might go through, Jesus leads by example, and he's desperate for us to know of this. And finally, I would just like to leave you with the words of our prayer book, which I'm sure you've heard before. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing through the power of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.